All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. We're still talking about what the country needs right now. We'd like to hear your feedback. I'll be reading some of them in just a bit. Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. My guests are still with me. Nerima Wako, Executive Director, Siasa Place. Mudiora Kariara, Party Leader, TGN. Anthony Buluma, CEO, KYPA, which is the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association. There's something the President said during the prayer breakfast. Let's listen to what he had said.
If we all feel the pain of what it is that we have to do, then we are alive. But if we feel the pain of others, then we are human beings. I want us to ask ourselves, if we feel the pain of the 3%, then it's because we are alive. But if we feel the pain of the millions of young people who are looking for a job, if we feel the pain of the 7 million Kenyans who live in indignity in slums, then we are human beings.
Buluma, the President wants you to feel the pain of other people, which makes you a human being. And isn't this where the problem is in this country, where we can't relate to what other people are going through? He says this is simply to spur jobs. Simple as that.
I think if you heard me, Trevor, I actually gave a personal account of how I relate with this conversation, because all of us have their perspective to it. My human perspective is born out of a personal experience, you know. I'm still a young person, walked out there without a job until I landed what I'm doing right now. There are many others who are walking the same path. And I think what the President is speaking to, he wants us to also hear the voices of many Kenyans who are not as privileged as we are. And I think that statement is perfectly in order. And you could actually tell by even the claps that he was getting, because he was now reconnecting with the Kenyan people, taking the conversation back to where it should be. The conversation should be what is in need for the Kenyan people. Trevor, shortly after a few months from now, we'll now be discussing pacts about leaders and their welfare. But when and since when as a country did we start discussing the welfare of somebody living in a slum? It's the first time. Okay. And I think these are some of the good lessons we're picking from this. You know, Trevor, there is one person who said that let your past be your wisdom, let your present be your weapon, and let your future be your purpose. We have a very rich history as a country, you know. We've walked through struggles. That's why we've described the first liberation, we've described the second liberation. Now people are saying the third liberation must be about the common man. We are no longer just discussing documents in form of the constitution, amendments and whatnot, but we are now discussing the content in terms of how do we improve on the welfare, the lifestyle, the dignity of the common man. And I think for us to be able to achieve that, we must equally adopt practical measures. I like what Nerima has pointed out, that we must clearly define where we are going so that there is ownership. Because I think, again, I will emphasize, the disconnect is born out of lack of proper information and update as to what exactly is happening. You pointed out correctly that one of the concerns that people have is in terms of what framework, in terms of regulation, will the government be using to implement some of these things? So if people are able to envision that, then there's some level of clarity. Then you'll begin to see a change towards in favor of what the government is trying to do. Because you can tell, just reading on face value, they're good intentions, you know. If you're talking about slum upgrading, that's a very good, honest intention. Because we know that, for example, Nairobi harbors the second largest slum in Africa, in the entire continent, you know, just after Soweto. So how do we shift that very sad story or state of affair about Kenya to something else beautiful? You know, in China, it is known that in one of the areas, and these are some of the thoughts that probably our government should also be entertaining. In one of the, I think it was one of the cities, one investor decided to convert what was a horrible state of affairs into the most beautiful city that employed those people living there and actually created health facilities for them. So this whole upgrading program must be something very comprehensive that you can visualize and rejoice in even the sacrifices that we have to make. Yeah. I told somebody that I don't feel like Kenyans are afraid of, taking measures that are sacrificial to help our government. But all they need is for the government to actually win the trust. And for us to be able to win the trust, that's why a terminology like reconciliation is relevant. Because reconciliation doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything. It simply means that we are creating a friendly environment for us to coexist in terms of common shared interest.
Yeah.
I like what the opposition has done, and that's what I was saying even off the cameras, that they have provided their 10-point alternative so that the country can be able to actually assess and say, okay, the government has proposed this, and it makes a lot of sense. Is there anything from what the opposition is giving that we can actually pick? They have pointed out issues close to austerity measures. Is it a conversation that we are bold enough to have and say, can we reduce this from Nerima in the spirit of the housing levy so that we accommodate Anthony Buluma, who did not necessarily grow up in the States, just putting you on the spot. Yeah. Is it possible for us to start those kind of conversation? And that would be a very honest conversation. And I think that's the place where reconciliation begins. If these mandamanos were born to actually push us to the negotiating table, so as Kenyans we begin to say, okay, this one is a very lucrative idea. But for us to achieve it, how do we balance this, Other than austerity measures, I've seen them mention a few other things, including duplication of roles. Is it something government wants to look at? As the finance committee retreats, do they want to look at, are there things that we can exclusively leave for counties to predominantly do? Again, there are conversations around employment creation. Remember, we must also be alive to the fact that we live in a bicameral parliament, but equally, we have two sets of government, the national and the county government. Yeah. So we should not at any one time imagine that the county governments do not have a role in enhancing the lives of the people. My own imagination is, if at all this housing project is to be sustainable, the county government should actually be creating a conducive environment for their people to benefit. In this sense, Trevor, how are we preparing these young people to create manufacturing industries in their counties? Are we doing that? Is there a deliberate government policy intended, targeted, like the way we had AGPO, 30% procurement, defined in this regulation under the housing program, targeted at the young people, saying like 50% of all these programs will be implemented by young people. So if you're an engineer in counties, government should actually, through the National Employment Authority, be deliberately looking for your information. Yeah. So that they say, we already as a government have prepared a database of all the qualified young people to take up these roles. So that if I'm an engineer, I've been thriving in Nairobi looking for opportunities, I can now begin to start thinking of how to go back in my house in Nambale and operate from there. Because I know whatever I'm chasing in Nairobi, I can get even better in Nambale.
In the county, okay.
That should be the next conversation. But you see, no one is bringing that up. And that's why I'm saying, Trevor, there's a clear disconnect. The Mwananchi is missing out again on this conversation. We are now almost starting to discuss tenders and deals. How will Mujora here and his party get a deal out of this? And that's where we lose the plot. The intention is right. But now we must extend it to now documenting how does it profit the man, the common man. And I think that's why Kwame's view was perfectly in order, that the sustainability question must also be addressed at this stage, not after. Because if we wait for it to come after we've given money, then you will never see those young people benefiting. Yeah. Remember, Trevor, we are coming from days where AGPO was passed, intended for young people who are not as empowered. So an old man comes and says, do this, register the company, I'll finance. Your work is just to go there and take the tender. I'll pay you 100,000, me I go with my profits. The risk of those things are about to happen. And that's why the predictions look very pessimistic, but the intentions are very optimistic. Yeah. So for us to reconcile the two, we must begin to also interrogate how are we going to empower these young people to be manufacturers. I want to be a manufacturer. All right.
Yeah. And Nerima, in a country of more than 50 million people, of course, we wouldn't agree on everything. So that's part of it is the discourse that we're having right now. Now, the government is saying that they are trying to not subsidize consumption. They want to subsidize production. Isn't that a valid reason? to do everything that they're doing in the finance bill right now, including the taxation that has been adjusted here and there.
Yes. So, I mean, it's valid, Trevor. It's valid. But for me, okay, let me ask a question. Buluma, how many times or how often do you get someone messaging you for an opportunity?
I can't count. Even this morning.
Muthiora?
Yeah.
Okay. So for us here on Listable, it's every day. Okay? We're not the president. We are CEOs of smaller companies. Small. But we get this every day. So it's just, I'm just highlighting the dire concern of our country right now. So I am all for it. Yes, tax for production. As long as it equates to opportunities, I am all for it. But even when you're talking about things like for content creators, their tax, it's still not clear. A content creator, let's talk about YouTube, for instance. There are levels of how much revenue they get, right? When you get to 100,000 views or followers to 250,000, there are different levels to where you get the black card, which is diamond, which is over 1 million subscribers. So there are levels. So that means even because you're receiving much more, you pay much more in taxes. Now, in this particular document, nothing. So if someone who I know youth who have subscribers of 300 is going to be competing with Diamond of 3.9 million, or someone in Kenya, Sauti Sol, who have subscribers of over 1 million. So they're going to be paying the same tax for creating the same content. So for me, that's why I'm saying the process is not clear. And there are enough people to help you think through this. So why are we not utilizing the Kenyan mind which exists to be able to come up with a proper roadmap so that we achieve more? But also, in the aspect of, yes, you want production, you want even our wood. Me, I would love to buy Kenyan-made produce. I would love to. But even in that regard, we struggle with materials. Or even when we talk about supporting farmers and fishers, Kenya, we still don't even have enough in terms of nutrition. You know, we're supposed to eat a certain level of protein. We don't eat it. So that's how you find our unga is fortified with vitamins and things. So if we can even support the farmers, fantastic. But there are many various loopholes that occur in the counties, in rural areas, that we're not meeting. So when we see a finance bill that is requesting for more in the budget, even in health, up to 35%, but it's still going nationally, there's a problem. The issue is in the counties. Health is devolved. It's the same for agriculture. You're still seeing a lot of the pocket in the national, but the issue is in the counties. So those are the gaps. Yeah. And it's very easy. I love how our president speaks. He's such a good orator. He speaks so well and he's intelligent. And I can tell him for free because he's very good at hiring the best of communications to create narratives on his side. All they need to do is minimize. That's it. Just minimize the extensive or expansive allowances. Kenyans will see it. You don't even need to communicate it that often. You don't need to tell us, I'm doing this, Kenyans will see it. And that's where they will begin to build trust. But if we're seeing that there's too much of asking from Kenyans, demanding from Kenyans, you pay your tax, it's your right to pay your tax, it's your responsibility. But it's also your responsibility to watch our resources. How come we are not allowed to speak in the same volume to you? Also, you watch our resources that we're giving you. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Muthiora, you've been on the streets a lot, and now the opposition is also threatening to go back to the streets.
And we'll be joining them.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. And this is what Buluma was speaking about, healing the political culture. Is that the best way to address these concerns?
No, it's not. But when you operate in a setup where every channel is captured, sometimes it leaves you no option but to use the nuclear that perhaps will make sense to them. Our parliament is captured. The first thing that William Ruto did when he assumed office is he bought those who were up for sale in parliament. So clearly, if you want to use parliament to effect the change that the people really need, it's not going to work. let me just take you back to his story about pain and everything. The First Lady recently was hailed for cycling to an Acros event. The bicycle she rode cost over $500,000. Yes, it's a gesture. It's showing there's an alternative. On Sunday, his son, George, was in church with a gunia with $3 million. Every other Sunday, Gachagua dishes out money in church.
All these allegations that we can't verify. I know you've seen some of them online, but we can't verify them here authoritatively.
Well, for your job, you may say that, but Kenyans know what I'm talking about. So if these people really understand the pain that Kenyans are going through, then they know that we do not need band aid. What we need to do is to create high-quality jobs. What we need to do is to implement measures that are not populist. And since they have captured the channels that Kenyans can use, then that's why we have to go out there and make our voices heard. Anthony here outlined very well that our constitution provides for public participation. But we know in Kenya currently, we sort of just have public pacification. You just show up and then they say, we did this, they tick a box, and the can is kicked down the road. So if they do not hear what our representatives have already said to them, because there are members of parliament who have already said they will reject this bill. Yeah. If they use the tyranny of numbers to pass the bill, then clearly they will encounter Kenyans in the streets. And Kenyans are not supporting Raila Odinga because he's Raila Odinga. It's just that he seems to understand what their plight is at the moment, and he's courageous enough to come out and hold this government. But
even that in itself is debatable, because we've seen this on both sides. The Azimio side saying we have instructed our politicians to shoot down the bill. The Kenya Kwanza side saying we have instructed our politicians to make it pass. So how then can you decide who represents the people more than the other?
Well, I can tell you, majority of Kenyans are in the category of those who cannot afford to pay 450 shillings for a 2 kg packet of sugar. So if there is a group that says we should pass measures that say this 450 is not high enough, let's take it to a higher price, then clearly that group is not with Kenyans. So since Raila Odinga right now and Azimio and us are on the side that says hold the tax measures you want to implement, they're too punitive, then that's where the people are. Okay. And where the people are, that's where God is speaking. And the people will continue to heed and take action. They're not paying attention. They think it's just politics. But this is how things go bad.
Okay. And Buluma, this is what you're talking about, healing the political culture, because they always say that the truth is not relative. The truth is just the truth. But who is saying that truth is where now the problem comes in? Because even earlier on, Mudiora was saying that, yes, when the politicians came in, they were bought. But who do you blame for that? The people who have been bought or the buyer? You get what I mean? The reason why the arguments are both sides. So how do we heal this political culture that you're talking about? Because it starts right down from the young people who are voting as well. We could see the votes split right down the middle. They say we are right. These ones insist that they are right. How do we get a convergence of some sort when it comes to healing the political culture, which you raised earlier on?
I think it's an entire process. It's not an event, and it's a culture that we must begin to inculcate as early as now before we get to the next election. I know, Trevor, it's on record that the last election did not attract the significant population as was desired, especially of young people. A good chunk of them opted out. And I think it's because they're resisting. They're resisting bad politics. They're resisting bad behaviors. And they're trying to see whether they can salvage this country when the opportunity presents itself for them. And that's why sometimes these bad behaviors must be punished during the election, because that's the only window we have, save for the much more complicated process of collecting signatures to recall an MP. I honestly believe that also our leaders must train themselves to be honest enough. When you pick a course, go with that course to the very end. And you'll be respected for that. I personally do not agree with the whole idea of, somebody who campaign on an alternative platform now crossing the floor to come and now begin to be the one propagating the ideals of your opponent within the context of democracy.
What do they tell you? I mean, you interact with them all the time. What do they say is the reason behind it? Because I've had very varied and interesting reasons. Some of them saying that despite the fact that I belong to this party, if there are certain things this other party espouses that I believe in, I should be allowed to go with them.
I think most of them argue they are not in government per se. But you see, that must be...
It's a selfish deal rather than for the people.
I don't know what informs, to be honest, their thinking. But my assumption would be, it's okay for the opposition to, in some instances, agree with what the government is pushing, especially when it is there in good for the people. And I think Uhuru Kenyatta, when he lost the 2002 election, had actually set a very good precedent in terms of how an opposition can be modeled. Because after losing, I will never forget, and I think, in primary school, his words were, we accept the loss and we accept our space as an opposition. But we will not be ordinary opposition. We will be constructive in our opposition. Constructive means that where the government is right, we will agree with the government. Where the government is wrong, we'll be there to provide alternative opinion. I think the members who are crossing the floor are weakening our democracy. I think what the government needs is a strong check and balance system that allows them to be accountable. But you see, when all of us are on the same bus, when will we be able to tell if the driver is off? We need someone out there as a police person, to stop the driver and say, you are overspeeding, you are driving too slow, you are not playing by the rules. But if all of us now begin to say, because it suits my interest to just cross over, then we are losing the point. Okay. Let me give you an example, Trevor. I really admired Okiya Omtata. The president visited Busia a while back ago. And we were there, and everyone stood. And everyone was just, pledging loyalty and speaking to the president kindly. But Okiya Omtata took to the floor. And the first thing he did was, first of all, acknowledge their very rich history with the president, including the fact that at one point, the president financed part of his litigation costs when he was still an activist. Yeah. But then came on and told him, now, Your Excellency, I will be very honest with you. If you pass this finance bill, I'm taking you to court next week. Bold enough. Constructive disagreement. I think that's where our legislators need to go. Okay. Because the moment you do that, then you begin to build confidence, especially in the voters. Okay. They begin to see, my vote actually counts. There are Kenyans who still have alternative voice. It is our duty, those of us who ascribe to the Kenya Kwanza ideology, to actually convince and persuade even those who have a divergent view to agree with us. Right. But now, if it's so easy, what will stop exploitation of public resources? What will stop, manipulation of our political system? If it's so easy, we will lose it as a country. But the moment we make it very difficult for our government to actually to be accountable, I think it works for everyone's good. I think some of the best days for Kenyans was the period between 2008 and 2012. Because we had government and opposition in the same government. You had Prime Minister Raila, who was supposedly more of an opposition, and you had Mwai Kibaki. And consistently, every time there were issues, you'd see Raila take a different direction. Yeah. And they would be forced to get to a point of consensus. If you ask many Kenyans, they'll tell you that's the best period for Kenya. Okay. And I think it's good to have a strong opposition like we have. And I do not have a problem with Kina Muthiora going to the streets. Yeah. It's a constitutional provision. But my take is that just as they're claiming that the housing is not a priority, I don't think maandamano is a priority right now. Okay. We are past that stage. They should be on the table, like they have done, providing alternative propositions, 10-point alternatives to the finance bill. Okay. Then we now review it and say, what can we accommodate? Right. Because we cannot also assume that the monopoly of knowledge is within government. Government has the privilege of service. Okay. But we can enrich conversations within government by giving alternative measures. All right. So the streets are not the best place Parliament would be the best place through the people you elected.
The same parliament where members are ejected and given suspensions when we have very critical business to transact. And even the streets, you're not allowing us to protest in the streets. We were tear gassed, yet we had given notification. So what exactly are you saying? What is this government doing?
Yeah.
Double speak won't help. We need to be honest. And in fact, for a government that is led by someone that is church-going, a deputy that has built churches, we expect for their word to count much more than just mere talk.
Yeah. Nerima, do you support this mandamano? Because at some point you bore the brunt of it. And this is where the conversation starts, because depending on how you answer that question.
I know.
Then the reason why I'm setting you up with that is because you've been labeled so many times, even I am confused. I don't know which side you belong to now. So
I'm on the Kenyan side.
Part of the things that we were talking about, political sanitation. How do you clean it up that your voice is just your voice and it doesn't necessarily fall on either government or opposition?
Yes, and I agree with Buluma a lot because he's in the political space, truly inside, and me, I'm outside, although we partner a lot together. And Kenya, the context of it is everything somehow finds a political agenda where you have to be placed on a side. It's like there are only two sides that exist. So it makes me happy when I see the likes of Muthiora coming to the fore, because we need diversity in the political context and even in conversations. So for me, the obvious answer, I support mandamano, and simply because it's my constitutional right. If I do not agree with something in this country and I feel the only way for me to be heard is a protest, I will do a peaceful protest. And I do not want that right taken away from me. So I agree with it. Whether it's the only solution, absolutely not. There are several other solutions. However, there are situations where a protest is only left. And I do think that we're in a country that should allow us for political association. We should have the freedom of expression. So my work every day is to make sure that that freedom is there and it's allowed. So even when they were out and some of them were arrested, we made sure that we supported even virtually. Yeah. We did. Okay. And so for me, it's about people having that freedom of expression. So kudos.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that's a Kenyan talking, and there are millions of them out there who are pressed by the high cost of living. Yeah.
Nerima, still on you. Yesterday, Silvanus Osoro was here, the Member of Parliament, and he mentioned that leadership is not so much about being liked. It's about having a vision for the country and knowing the direction you're taking. In fact, he was speaking to Sam Gituku and he said, sometimes your children will not want to go to school, but you know better as their parent. So you will insist that they go to school. Yes. He was giving that analogy in terms of the nation being led by the President, William Ruto, right now. He has a vision. That is the direction we're taking. You might disagree with him, but it's for the good of the country in future. Okay. Do you agree with that? So I'll agree, but I will give it in a story, an anecdote. So if I am in a household and my father or my mother, let's say, is giving me direction and advice to a particular issue. They are my father, they are my mother, I respect them. But I will respect them even more if I'm able to see the result of their good choices and decisions. What am I saying? If I had advice coming from an uncle who's a drunkard, would I take it as seriously? So for me, what I see with our administration, if our administration was to reduce their cost expenditures, if we are going to use the same reasoning as Honorable Osoro, now, if they were to reduce their allowances, now, if we were to reduce their extravagant trips, I would listen. But if you want to continue spending, you want to continue traveling, and then when you ask them why all of this, and they tell it's political, we have to pay back the people who supported us, so, lazima, our friends, we have to bring them in, So now if you're telling me that also me when you tell me it's for your own good, I'll tell you, things are hard right now, it's not a priority for me right now, I rather put food on the table. Okay. Let's hear with your on this. The direction that the country is taking. You had mentioned that the president is clueless. But what if this is actually the right direction?
Well, first and foremost, let me use the analogy you gave about Osoro saying sometimes you could be a father and you have to give direction to your children. Now, for the Kenya Kwanza government and William Ruto for that matter, he actually looks at Kenyans as children, like we can think for ourselves. That's why he has to do the thinking for us and also follow up to make sure that what he says is implemented. And that's wrong. He has no monopoly of knowledge or wisdom. He needs to consult. He's not been doing a lot of that. When he was campaigning, he went around and people gave views. And do you remember how strong he came out with regard to added taxes? But he's the same person in his very first budget imposing even more taxes. So the direction we need to take is, let us listen to what the people are saying, because there are so many ideas in the marketplace at the moment, and one of them will be what we need to lift ourselves from the morass we find ourselves in. So let them listen. That's number one. Number two, let us acknowledge that we are living in very difficult times. If we do not change direction as a country, Kenya is surely going to end up where we are headed, and that is in economic turmoil. So after we listen, let's implement that which the people have said, and it's different from what is being shoved down our throats right now. If we do that, then we begin to lift ourselves from the situation we are in. Nobody wants protests every week, sometimes twice a week, because it disrupts economic activity. But if those in charge are not ready to listen, then it leaves the rest of us with no option. They talked about state capture and that they would get a task force to investigate and maybe provide a way forward about how to deal with that. Our parliament right now is captured by this regime. Our institutions are captured. You remember William Ruto, within his first days in office, ensured the operationalization of the judiciary fund. But the other day, we heard that they are not even able to pay allowances. So was it just talk, or there was action? Since September, I've seen statistics that this government has collected about 1.4 trillion. How come we have no money for the counties? We have no capitation going to schools. What's really going on that NHIF is not able to make good of whatever obligations it has with the service providers? Let them sit in those offices that Kenyans taxpayers pay for, and work for Kenyans, not for themselves.
All right.
Let them stop showing the opulence we see. The other day, our trade CS was wearing a watch in an event.
Again, that, online conversations.
I'm just saying,
yes.
This information is out there and Kenyans are interacting with it. Let them stop vomiting on us because they are full. Kenyans are hungry and Kenyans are tired. This is the one thing they think we are not. We are tired of the games.
Okay. Let's bring up some of the feedback. A lot of it is coming through, and read some of them on air now. Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. Let's see what you're saying before I take my round of closing remarks from my guests here. We're running out of time here. And Ingndolo says, Nerima, thanks for mentioning the plight of engineers. That is the implementation of local content and knowledge transfer is at its minimum. We have over 23,000 graduate engineers who are wallowing in miasma of joblessness. Babu Michael says the KK government hid at the back of the Mamamboga and the border trying to say that they fight for them, but in real sense, they were using them. It's now clear that the voice of the same people are being neglected when it comes to the finance bill. Okay? Bobotino Wino says Kenya needs reconciliation and politicians should put their interest aside and embrace it after coming from a contested elections, and especially during this economic hardship we are experiencing. Engineer Lazaro says Kenya urgently requires visionary leaders. Our priorities at the moment are reducing cost of living, wooing investors, stabilizing Kenya's shillings, and unifying all Kenyans regardless of their political affiliations, race, or religion. Sir Nixon says the government needs to eradicate corruption and misappropriation of funds, which has seriously eaten up our trust in how it spends our taxes. Singapore did it and made it. Omori says, what is the purpose of the 41 billion that Parliament is allocating to itself? How can Parliament spend over 3 billion every month? We need to obtain detailed information about the budget allocated to Parliament for public examinations, and it seems to be wasteful. Sam Masika says, my fear is, will the next regime look at things like Kenya Kwanza? Lack of continuity scares me. But as long as someone can be accountable, even after Ruto, then everything is possible. Okay. Macheusi says, the Kenyan version of reconciliation is when one tribal kingpin works with another from a different tribe for their own personal interests. Power. All is just rhetoric. Remy Butia says, political elite are putting their own parties and interest above the interest of the nation as a whole. Brian Chemwa says, Kenya needs to resolve conflicts, address grievances, and find common ground to rebuild trust and understanding. The two political alliances should embrace peace building that will contribute to the establishment of more inclusive, just, and cohesive societies. Godi Baraza says the reconciliation process should be premised on a genuine need to unify the nation and rally it behind an idea of development and prosperity for all. Anything less of this should be regarded as empty rhetoric. Frank Orinde says a call for prayer and reconciliation is not only rhetoric but also a mockery. Kenya Kwanza leadership, that is the KKA, have openly shown that they are not ready to listen to any divergent views. A point in case is how they are forceful that finance bill must pass, coercing and intimidating MPs. Buluma, so going forward, how do we build a cohesive nation, considering that we've had statements like shareholders in this country, where the Deputy President mentioned that they're shareholders. In fact, he says that prosperity will be brought to every part of the country, but when it comes to the appointments, there are those who supported this regime. But the people who argue on his behalf say that it is true that sometimes you need people who share the same ideology with yourself as you build government.
I think what is clear, and building from your question on what my very good friend and senior Silvana Zosoro said, is we need to relook at our definition of leadership. Because I think I belong to those who define leadership as the ability or the capacity to influence others in a positive way. Keyword influence, persuade, not impose. You know, the question that begs is, how do you become a member of parliament? It's through persuasion, by whatever means you use. The same means you use to get to be a member of parliament should be the same means you use to serve those people. Because leadership is a donated privilege, you know? Not all of us can be in that house. So you must look at it from that point of view, that it's a donated privilege. And you owe it to the elected, the people who elected you, to actually consistently engage them and work with them in this journey. Otherwise, you'll be taking a walk alone in the park. For us to genuinely achieve true reconciliation, Trevor, the first thing that we must be able to address is our thinking as a country. I think that's the bottom line, you know? How are we perceiving things? Because the problems we are facing, the same thinking that we use to create those problems are the same thinking that we are using to try to solve the same problem. We will not achieve any new result. And you can actually see the manifestation of that thinking by some of the pronouncements by some of our leaders. That's why whenever I meet a position that makes a lot of sense, I have to give it a tick. What the president said was a tick. There are many things that also Prime Minister Raila said that are a tick. But again, I don't know why their generals are not borrowing from the weight of wisdom that the two leaders have, you know? This is nothing personal. It's all about country. And for you to manifest country, it means you must consistently be looking at the mirror to see whether the people are still with you. That's the first step towards achieving the reconciliation you're talking about. Because anything minus the people, Trevor, we will just be going back to the same thing. And the thinking that has gotten us to this problem we are dealing with right now is because we have left it after the election. It's now about the welfare of that person who was elected. So that's why you feel some Kenyans feel left out, you know. This election that we held last year was very close, you know, almost a difference of around 200,000. You must consistently, in your pronouncement, speak to this, was it 7 million, 6.8 that Raila got, as you speak to the 7.2 or 7 million that Ruto got. All your pronouncement as a leader must constantly be conscious of the fact that there is that population that still belongs. And some of them elected even leaders beyond the political spaces, political formations. So we must constantly as a country engage ourselves in conversations that bring everyone on board. And I speak this knowing so well that I work with young members of parliament and I work with young people every other day. Every other place you go to, most of them feel left out. They feel like the conversation that we are having as a country belongs to a few. And that's a country that we must bury and resurrect, a country where every Kenyan feels they are part and parcel of the discussions on the table. Yeah. They must feel that they are not being discussed as part of the menu, you know, but as the people determining what is on the menu. So, Trevor, if we are able to imagine a country, let me give you an example, and my background is international relations. One of the observations that we get from international relations is that the level of patriotism in the US is higher than any other place, because Americans take pride. If they come to Kenya and they feel you're playing their anthem, you'd actually see the pride coming out, because they know they have no any other better place than their country. Yeah. But here, we are at a point where people are even discussing we should, you know, what is it called? Liquidate this country, everyone apewe share yake, alafu muende tukutane huko kwingine. You know what we were joking about, that Nerima uende Uganda na share yako, mimi I can go to US. Malawi, Mudiora wewe utaenda US, ujakuwa huko labda. So we don't need to be getting to that point. We need to actually see Kenyans speak about Kenya patriotically, because they feel they belong. They feel like government decisions are part of them. They feel like they are consulted enough. And I think the drafters of the Constitution were trying to inculcate such values, you know, when they introduced the integrity section, so as we can be able to set the standards in terms of where we should be playing at with our value system. They introduced the public participation component. We have the access to information law that provides that the public must constantly be informed, because they are the bosses, and we must consistently insist, even if it means you wake up in the morning and the first thing you say, they are the bosses. Trevor, the only reason this station is there is because there are people who are watching, and those people are not necessarily politicians. It's the public that they want to digest what is citizen telling us today about our country, so that they know, can we wake up with so much pride about Kenya. Okay.
Nerima, how do we fix this going forward? You mentioned the crisis that we seem to be ignoring. How do we fix it going forward now?
So there's an article that I'm reading in the Standard. The leaders of tomorrow are growing up, calling out thieves intent on stealing their future. And it talks about how a man is surprised that his 16-year-old is asking questions on corruption, while during the presidential debates, he was watching the English Premier League. So what I'm saying is, young people have to be part of the conversation. And with this particular bill, it touches us directly and indirectly. I'm over here thinking, as someone who runs an organization and I have a staff of 15, if this bill passes, it's going to change in terms of the resource as an employer that I'll have to put down to go to tax. And I'm asking very important questions. Will my company survive? And if it survives, how? And this is a matter of fundraising, the access to resource and sustainability. So the only way we're going to be able to go forward is to be able to have conversations that are authentic with the right people at the table. We criticize not because we detest and dislike KK. It's because I want the best for my country and I'm patriotic. And I want to be able to have the freedom to express dissent. And if I approve, I will say job well done and I will support. So going forward, I think it's important what opposition has said and done, just like Buluma has mentioned. This is the process of shadow cabinets, shadow oppositions, so that we can see the various ideas that people have. over 100 people have petitioned this thing even before it's tabled. So that shows you that there's a lot of dissent. And so we need to understand why and to see whether we're able to come up with a plan that has not everybody on board, but at least majority. And finally, I think, imagine for me, if I'm thinking about these things, what about people who have large companies? I'm talking about over 200, 300 employees, factories, manufacturers. We're talking about production. That is going to change how much they pay in taxes. I'm sorry, but this is going to look like layoffs. That's going to be the easiest solution. It's fast approaching before you stabilize. So some of these decisions companies are making in boardrooms right now, trying to figure out how are we going to water, how are we going to survive. And this is something that's going to be with us for the next 3 years. So I think we have to put our political agendas aside. This has to be for the Kenyan people first. And like I mentioned, it's good that we're having different voices from civil society. As soon as opposition now comes in and starts to impose themselves on civil society, it waters down the voice of civil society. So stay in your corner as opposition. Stay in your corner as being a voice to counter the administration, while civil society is the voice of the people as well, so that they're able to come in as stakeholders and also bring their grievances to both.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that is something that can be put on the main agenda.
Do you trust Parliament to execute their role properly this time? Because even though we speak and give these views, it will still boil down to the members of Parliament who will have to vote on this bill. They said they're going to vote clause per clause. There's still a bit of recommendations that might be made in the Finance Committee, but do you trust Parliament, who are the representatives of the people, to carry out their mandate properly?
I will have to trust Parliament because they are the representatives who have been elected to represent us. However, it does give me a glimmer of hope, the fact that DP Gachagua was at a funeral in Nyeri County and he pushed for all the members in the region to support the bill. And he said there's only one who has refused. So there are few. There are few who are seeing that this thing is not something I support, and I will stand my ground even if I am under the KK administration. So I am hopeful, because you do not need hundreds of people to create and effect change. You just need a handful. And that's a saying from Thomas Sankara. So for me, I do think that the fact that we have speckles of individuals who are thinking and debating, it's important, because not all those particular clauses should pass. And I've given several examples in the show today. And even finally, the fact that they want to increase the income tax for people earning over 500,000 and above. But how many people earn that? How many Kenyans earn over 100,000? So even the dynamics of it, yes, it's going to be a lot of money. Yes, increase their taxes. Yes, they should pay. But they are also a minority number of the country. The burden will still remain on the middle still. So we still haven't solved anything with that particular tax. So for me, hopefully there are people who will stand their ground and be brave and look at the content and decipher, does this help my people? But as soon as we start to change the narrative that it's those who are salaried that don't want it, and then those who have not are the ones who deserve it, it's a very dangerous narrative. I do want to support, I do want to help, but be clear to me. What is it I'm doing and where is my effort going? Do not create this narrative that it's just because you don't want. That's dangerous, because that is a road we do not want to walk on. We don't want to walk on, because Kenya, a lot of people live below the poverty line, and as soon as we create it, we go beyond reasoning and rhetoric, and then we begin to have emotive conversations, which I'm totally against. Use facts.
Diora?
Well, the president was embraced by the millions that embraced him in the last election because he told them about bottom up. He needs to go back to the bottom and listen to what Kenyans are saying. And they're saying, you made a promise to uplift us. Go for measures that are more than just the cosmetic practices that we see you trying to do. The opposition needs to engage better. Protests are not the only way, but if it's what we must do for us to be heard, then let's do them in a way that does not disrupt the economy. we have an opportunity to reboot our economy. But if the finance bill 2023 is passed as is, it's going to destroy more value than it will create. It's going to cripple us further than we have already been crippled. So I pledge, may our leaders for once do the right thing, and that is be true to their calling. Let them be people of integrity. Let them be people who are forward-looking. Anthony here asked if a study should perhaps be conducted to establish why Kenyans do not trust the government. Kenyans do not trust the government because the government, when left unchecked, never delivers quality on anything they do. For instance, right now, if you're applying for a passport, you know you're going to be in a lot of trouble because a printer broke down some years ago while Matiang'i was still a CS. They've not been able to fix that. Since independence, the goal was to build sufficient classrooms for Kenyans. They've never been able to do that, but they want us to believe that they can build houses for Kenyans. We do not need a study. Let's just apply common sense. Let's just fulfill what our Constitution says under Article 43, I believe, give Kenyans the social and economic rights that they need. And once the environment is good enough, it will create the jobs that Kenyans need, allow those in business to thrive, and Kenyans will afford to build houses for themselves.
Okay. Let me take some quick feedback as we wind up on this conversation. Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya using the hashtag DAYBREAK. I believe we had already taken most of those feedback during that time, and that's the only time we had. Thank you so much for making time this morning. Mudhira Kariara, Party Leader, TGN, Anthony Buluma, CEO, KYPA, that is the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association, and Nerima Wako, Executive Director, Siasa Place. Coming up next is Level Up Friday, right? Yes. See you in just a bit. Willis Raburu is on the decks in just a short while. Baz, see you shortly.